We are here for our session by Ted on who does what, roles and circles to spread the load. Ted, I'm going to introduce you and then we'll get started. Ted is co-founder of Sociocracy for All and co-author of the Sociocracy Handbook, Many Voices, One Song. He is a transgender man and lives in Pioneer Valley, cohousing with his partner and 5 children. And Ted, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm talking about my children. I hope they're not going to walk in. They have a talent of crashing Zoom calls. Yeah, welcome everybody. I am curious if you are willing to see what drew you to this particular session. If you would drop it in the chat, just a few phrases on that, just to give me a little bit of a reality check and direction.
Mary, would you like a turn?
Yeah, it's just simpler to say it. I mean, I'm in a co-housing group in Gainesville, Florida. I moved in 3 years ago, so I'm stepping into co-housing is kind of behind me. But this seemed to be a session that is an ongoing issue, so that's why I chose it.
And I'm of course reading. Maybe you too. Who here is somewhat familiar, at least a little bit of familiarity with sociocracy? And it's not a requirement, but okay. And is there anybody even in a sociocratically run community besides me? There, Wendy. Okay, got it. Got it. So you might be aware sociocracy is a form of governance, right? And one of the ideas of sociocracy is decentralization of things, so that it's not everything gets decided by everybody together or by one central, whatever you call it, committee, but that things are spread out, decentralized. But let me actually start at the beginning. This is where I live. Pioneer Valley Cohousing. We're actually considering a new name right now, but we don't have a new name yet, so that's what we are in Western Massachusetts. The community was started on, people moved in 1994. I was still in middle school then, I think, so I was not part of that. I moved here in 2012. You might be wondering, my accent is German. I grew up in Germany and then moved here 2010, actually. And one of the reasons we stayed in this country, actually, and didn't go back after my gig here was done, was because we had seen this community and instantly fell in love with it. Actually, when we had gotten the tour, and then we pulled, all the kids got back into their car, and then we pulled out of the driveway, and my oldest, who I think back then was 9, said, "Okay, when are we moving in?" And she basically channeled what we all were thinking of, like, okay, that's a no-brainer. Like, whatever, this is where we're moving. And then, the stars aligned, and a house big enough became available, and there we are. This community adopted what is called here dynamic governance, which is the same thing, exactly the same thing as sociocracy. So we use them interchangeably. And we adopted dynamic governance. It was on its way. I think the first meeting that I was a part of as part of my membership process was the meeting when DG, dynamic governance, was adopted. So that was in 2012. The years before that, it was run by whole group consensus. Just so you know, a little bit of context for that. So from that, you can tell that I was not the person bringing it here. It was actually my partner, or now partner, who brought it here. And but I've been, because of seeing what it was like here, I've been pulled into the sociocracy thing pretty quickly, and now that's what I do full time and have been for a few years. So what you see here is how we are organized. You see, there's a team for everything, and those teams are nested, right? By the way, one little thing, if you know some sociocracy, you know that this is a no, 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 too many circles under one circle, and yet there's a little bit of footnotes on here, but it doesn't really matter. Not right now and here, at least. So we have 4 main work circles here that are taking care of different aspects of the community. And one interesting thing about sociocracy is, because you might look at this and you're like, duh, that's how you organize, right? But one interesting thing about sociocracy is that Common House Circle, for example, is in charge of the Common House, period. It's not that they do the work, but everybody has to approve the 2 towels they want to buy. They manage the Common House. And what all the rest of us do is give them feedback. But they make decisions. So that's part of the decentralized decision making. That's one of the design principles of sociocracy, that you put small groups in charge of something, and that means really putting them in charge. Then community life, that's my home circle, so to speak. I'm part of community life and have been, I think, from since I moved in here. We do everything interpersonal, basically. You see, we have a bunch of sub-circles. So for example, governance, visioning, this is community work, membership, finance, caring council, data, and fun. The way we keep track of them more or less is because we have a system of sometimes linking. So sometimes, for example, membership, we have 2 people on membership. Is that true right now? Maybe 1 right now. There's a transition there right now. Anyway, 1 person at least on membership who's also part of community life. And that's how we hear about each other. Then governance improvement, governance circle, we have 2 people here that are also here, and visioning, same thing. So that's how we know about them. Or sometimes we have point people, like fun circle. We don't have anybody from some fun circle who's also on this circle, but we have a person who before every community life meeting checks in with fun circle and says, hey, how are things going? What's new? What's happening? I sometimes do make the comparison that watching a sub-circle, like supervising a sub-circle, is like supervising a teenager. They do their own thing, they're on their own stuff. They, know when they have to do their homework and when they have to go to bed. And you still provide a little bit of oversight, right? You make sure that they have what they need. You make sure that everything is going. If things are not going, you check in. Then we have buildings and grounds. Does obviously buildings and grounds, and that includes maintaining the snow plow and all the machinery that is important for that, the roofs, the painting, and so on. And then plants, animals, landscape, PALS, we call it, with a few subcircles. In case you're wondering and you're not familiar with sociocracy, you might wonder, what does this circle do? Because everything else is already taken care of. And that's the whole idea, that you have one circle in the center that does exactly one thing, and that is coordinating between those circles, just making sure that everything somehow goes together. For example, if there's lack of clarity between 2 circles, it's the general circle that we call coordinating circle, but it doesn't matter at all what you call it. It's the general circle that decides. So for example, I have a very real life example here, that the common house, as I said, is in charge of the common house. We have a brickyard in front of the common house that I always thought was part of the common house. There's a ping pong table there. Ping pong tables in front of the common house have never really required any policy making, okay? Because we have a ping pong table and you play. What's there to make rules about? Yet, in COVID times, there was all of a sudden there was the question of, hold on, do we still play ping pong? Do we clean the paddles? That was back in May when we really thought that like touching things was one of the main points of transmission. So there was a big freak out for everybody. Who decides? Who decides that? And then Common House was like, we don't decide that. Community life, community life has to decide that. And we're like, no, we don't want it. That's clearly in Common House domain. And then we all looked at pals and buildings and going like, somebody take this, Anyway, when you have a situation like that, it's a general circle that then decides. And the general circle, by the way, is made up out of 2 people from each of these circles. So 2 people from buildings and grounds, 2 people here, 2 people here, 2 people here. They make this circle. And they decide that together, which means it's not that you come out with a decision that is pushing community life, for example, to do something they don't want, because 2 of our people, so to speak, are on that circle and make that decision with everybody else. So they try to figure out how they can make a decision that best serves whatever is needed without forcing anybody to do anything. So that's how my community is organized, and that gives you a super brief introduction into circle systems in sociocracy. So why the change from consensus to sociocracy was because it was clear that what happened was, I think there were a few breaking points for people. For example, one, and that was before my time, right? But I've heard the stories. Apparently, for example, let's say you're motivated to paint the walls in the basement of the common house. You're thinking about what color would be nice, and you're thinking, oh, those 2 weekends I could be doing it, and you gather a team, then you realize, oh, we should actually ask for permission. And then you bring your plan to the general meeting, and in the general meeting, people shoot it down. Okay, that happens once, that's okay. You know, like whatever, they didn't want it, fine, okay. But that happens 2 or 3 times, and then you're like, what the heck, I was wanting to contribute, you know? And that kind of pattern just happened too often. And it wore people out, basically. And it was just too much time spent in meetings that felt not productive enough. Because one of the design principles of sociocracy is, or one of the insights really is, you can't really hear each other in a group of 60 people. In a group of 60 people, only some voices are heard. But if you want all voices to matter, you have to organize differently. You don't have to buy that from me. I know that some people disagree on that one, but that's the design principle. So it was basically a pain around governance that made this community switch. And one fun fact, by the way, is that this community switched by consensus to run by DG. So because of course the decision had to be made in the old system, right? But there was consensus to do that. All right. Feedback. So for example, and we still have what's called full circle for us. That's like the general circle, like the general meeting, I mean. And in the general meeting, all that happens is that we do connecting things, we explore things, we tell each other life stories or things like that. Or sometimes you might have circles that say, hey, we have a new idea and we want to hear feedback on that. And then, for example, Common House Circus runs a session at our general meeting that we call Full Circle, and gets feedback there. Or of course, you can write emails, you can send out surveys, you can talk to everybody individually, whatever you want to do to harvest feedback. And of course, everybody knows who everybody is. So if you have a feedback on something that hasn't been asked about, you walk up to the person and talk to them. So that's, okay, let's see. There are a bunch of questions here. No, there are more than 2 people. The 2 people are the links. You have, like, I think Common House Circle has 5 people, I think. Community Life has 6. I don't know this by heart. But we have 70 members or so, and most of them are somewhere in the system. Some people just show up for here and give feedback, and they're happy to do that. In the ping pong example, the central circle took on the task or took on deciding which circle it belonged to. The latter. Perfect question. They decide who decides, if that ever needs to be decided. And that's fairly rare, you know, but in COVID, some of the undefined things actually became visible. If no overlap, what's a good ratio? I don't understand that question. It must have been referring to something I said, but I don't remember what that was. If no overlap, what's a good ratio? How many circles does each member participate in? Let's see. So we have one person who's in many circles. She's in membership, she's in community life, she's leader of community life, which means she's also here. She's also on data, makes 4 circles. I think she's the person who's in most circles of all of us. I am part of community life and here. Oh, and here actually, 3 circles. Yeah, so some people have their own home and some people are a little bit all over the place. How do you resolve disagreements within a circle? That's a bigger question. You talk to each other. It's the short version, but I can say more about that, but not necessarily on this topic, actually. I do want to get to roles because we haven't even started talking about that. Okay. Do you ever have full circle to discuss something that pertains to everyone, such as adding a building that may affect everyone's property value? Yes. There are very few things, actually, very, very few things that are still, it's like a legacy thing. It's not technically a DG thing. It's legacy that are still decided by full circle. But again, I don't necessarily want to go there right now. But design review decisions is one of those. Can you parse the term dynamic governance? What makes it dynamic, which alludes to change and progress? Okay. I'm going to stop sharing real quick and just talk about that, just change of pace. What's dynamic about it is that the idea is that we make all decisions that are reversible as an experiment and we just improve over time. So for example, if we make a policy about a new membership process, we put a term end on it, and after, let's say, 2 years, we look at it again so that our policies stay fresh and we actually know them. So if you have a facilitator or a leader, that person is also selected by consent and for a certain period of time. So after, let's say, 1 year, and you can set that term yourself. So you decide together what term you want. So the idea is that nothing just stays like that because it is like that. You actually revisit and you look at it and go like, is that still what we want to do? So that's the dynamic aspect of it. Yeah, but dynamic governance, problem is if you Google it, I mean, dynamic governance is a great name. And if you Google it, you get all kinds of stuff. Well, if you Google sociocracy, you get exactly what you're looking for because that it's a term that is used only for that. So the organization that I'm a part of, Sociocracy for All, that I co-founded, is called Sociocracy for All to honor that legacy, because everywhere outside of the US, it's called sociocracy. It's just in the US that it's not called that consistently. Anyway, Sociocracy for All, this is where I live, this is where I work. Is an organization that has about 170 members worldwide and a bunch of people on staff, including myself. And we, of course, use the same system with a bunch of circles, and that's not even all of them. It actually has like sub-circles that are not shown here. So we have a bunch of circles by now. So for example, here, this is the group that takes care of content, like this kind of presentation, outreach, training. We do a lot of training for cohousing. We have actually a whole circle here in our ecosystem circle that is just for intentional communities. Like the people in this group are the people who understand cohousing or intentional communities in general and understand sociocracy and do things about that. They even have a sub-circle that's not shown, which is a drop-in-ish group for people who are in sociocratic communities. So then we have people all over the world in all kinds of places and so on and so on. So, but now the actual topic. That was all preamble reading. What I want to talk about today is something that you can use within sociocracy, but you can also use it anywhere else. And those are always my favorite topics for these kind of conferences, because I want to offer something that is sort of true to what I care about, but also usable for all kinds of other places. And that's roles. So I talked about circles, but now I would like to talk about roles. And I'll peek at the chat in a while again, but now I'm going to focus here. So a dynamic that we have quite often, and I saw somebody, when I asked my original question about what drew you here, I saw somebody speak to that, to the founder syndrome, for example. So we typically have two sides of the same phenomena going on. For example, they're the people who do stuff, right? Front of the line, they do stuff. They are always the people doing stuff, but they sometimes resent it. And they say things like, oh, this should be stepping up too, whatever, someone has to do it. I guess I'll do it again for the sake of the community. But it's starting to wear on them, right? So if you have these people in the community, and I guess it's always going to be somewhat unequal, and to some extent that's fine, but if it becomes like a pattern that you feel like you're falling into without it being your choice, then it's unhealthy, right? But there's the other side, and that is people who look at the doers that are doing a lot and have resentment. There she goes again, holding all the power. We're grateful it gets done, but she sure is a control freak. The word control freak, that was actually a quote of somebody who just told me that about a community member in a different community. That was the word they used. Like, yeah, she's doing a lot. We love that she's doing so much, but she's a control freak. Is this something that would get us out of that pattern? That's the question here. Okay, let's see. Another thing that's actually something that has become a little bit of a joke in my community is when people say, well, someone should clean up the kids' toys, right? Who's that someone? Like, and even better, if the community should make sure people do their part. These kind of someone should are simply not very specific, right? That's the problem. It's the lack of specificity that makes them not happen. If you say the community should, well, probably nothing is going to happen. That's actually a known effect, right? That if you have for example, if there's an accident happening somewhere out in the world, and there are a bunch of people standing around, nobody helps. If there's only one person in the room, that person helps. So knowing that you're it actually motivates people quite a bit, while knowing that there's 20 others who are just as responsible, or, you know, owe the community just as much, to use that thinking, then it typically doesn't happen. And of course, we all know that there's a ton to do in a community, right? There's just a ton of different tasks, which I'm symbolizing here, just a ton of different things. So here's an example. If, let's say, in the common house, the soap dispensers need to be filled up with soap from time to time. If that alone is my job, I'd say that's pretty boring. If my job is something more holistic, something more like, you know, make sure all cleaning supplies are in order, and I have choice, for example, over what kind of cleaning supplies to buy and so on, then it's like, oh, now I feel I have some agency here, right? I'm not just carrying out orders, I have agency. And it's a good idea to have like roles for people, like tasks clustered into roles where people experience it with agency, and then all of a sudden they have pride about their job. So what you want to do is have these pieces and know, like, this is the piece that I do, and it makes sense the way it is, and I have some agency about how I do it, and that's me. And then people again have this pride thing going, and they really step up into that. So for example, and this is something that I'm starting with something that you're probably all familiar with. I'm not sure how you organize cooking, but in my community, forever already in the beginning, there used to be head cooks. And we all understand what it means to be head cook. It means you're cooking the meal, you're supervising the helper cooks, assistant cooks, you shop, and you are in charge of cleaning up your leftovers and making sure everything is accounted for. All of that goes together with being the head cook. So it's an entire role, and everybody understands what that means, okay? So instead of just cleaning up leftovers or just like doing straight tasks, you're doing something that belongs together in a way that is like a meaningful not self-containing, but a meaningful chunk. A similar thing here is master of ceremony. For a retreat, we have one person that is the MC, and he's been doing it forever. And he also chooses what kind of acts make it into our no talent show, as we call it, right? So again, he's not just the person who's pushed on stage and like has to do something that he didn't have any choice over. He is choosing to be that, and he has a lot of decision-making power actually around the event. So he's not just carrying out, he's actually an agent there. So when I think about roles within circles, I think about these kind of roles where actually we are entrusting somebody to take care of something, and that makes it interesting and appealing to people. Another role that we have is the garden coordinator. I'm sure you have something like that too. I'm sure you have all kinds of examples for these kind of things. So the reason I'm bringing these examples is because of the concept of an operational role, as I call it, is not foreign at all. I'm not asking you to do something that you've never done. Actually, you might be saying, oh, we're already doing that. And all I'm here for is really to encourage people to do more of that. People are more likely to commit when they know what they are agreeing to. That is totally spot on. If you just tell people, oh, could you take care of that, of that, this or that, people have a hard time stepping up and into that because they're nervous about what else is being expected of them. So it's not so much about do you want to do something or not, it's more about is there clarity on what my piece is, what you're expecting of me, what belongs into that. Like people want to do a good job, right? So you need to provide the clarity of giving them a piece that they understand and where they exactly know how it plugs in and how it's being done. That's what empowerment looks like. Empowerment is not to drop people into a position where they cannot shine because they don't even know what the expectations are and where things are. And that's what we do way too often. We just drop people somewhere and think like, oh, just take care of it. But that's not empowering. That's just leaving people in the rain. So let's see, what do I have here? So to me, power is something, power and authority and tasks are something that need to be managed, and I guess the structure for that needs to be provided collectively, but with a lot of intentionality. That's what makes it empowerment. It's empowering. It's the intention and the clarity, those two things together. So in one way that I want to play with here, and that's really already the end of my slides, more or less, except for some examples. But what I would like to do is just do a little something here of writing role descriptions, which I know doesn't sound sexy at all. It sounds very much like homework, right? And yet I think role descriptions are one way to empower each other and to proactively provide opportunity to decentralize. Because I have a little bit of a theory going. It's completely just my gut instinct and seeing my community. But my feeling is often that some people are just more comfortable stepping into some of an unknown than others. So you have those doers who are totally happy to just go take care of something and fill in the gaps creatively. If they don't know, they just do something. But some people shy away from those kind of situations. So if you want those people to do work, then create a box for them that they understand. That's one way of getting the workload to be more spread out. So an operational role would be created whenever we have recurring tasks. So for example, everything, coordination of garden and so on, they are not autocrats. They are operating within a frame that you give them. I'm going to give 2 examples on that. And those people that are holding the roles for a certain period of time that you select to fill that role, they only report to the circle committee, whatever, when necessary. I'm going to tell you a few stories on that to make that clear. The good thing is, just on this point, is that when you have that person only report when necessary, you're cutting out a lot of somewhat repetitive and empty meeting time where people are just reporting on things that they could have just taken care of had we created the clarity that they just take care of that. We don't need to hear about everything somebody does, right? I mean, if we want to, we can, but I'm saying we don't have to. One thing that we do also, that's a little bit of a side comment more than anything else, is we select those people by consent. So in a sociocratic, fully sociocratic system, what you would do is you would create a role. Let's say, let's use the ping pong table as an example. You put a person in charge and say, okay, you oversee the ping pong table, make sure everything is in order, that all the ping pong balls that tend to be blown away by the wind are being put back in the bucket, and you buy new ones, here's your budget, you're on it, right? So now we create that role, which is a little bit like creating the box, and then we put somebody into that box and we decide by consent who that would be. So now you walk up to a person, instead of saying, hey, can you take care of the ping pong table? We say, okay, listen, we wrote down the role of what we want from you. Here's what we would want you to do. And here's the budget we're going to give you. We completely trust you that you buy you buy the ping pong balls you want to buy, and you decide when we need new ping pong paddles. And we actually did a selection process, and we thought you might be the most appropriate person to do this. Are you willing to do that? That's a whole different position to come from than to just appoint somebody or have somebody say, fine, I'll buy 2 paddles. We also, and that's more for sociocratic systems, doesn't fully carry over if you don't have a circle system, but in a sociocratic system, every role would be clearly attached to a circle, or to a circle in this case. So you know who you're reporting to if there's a problem, or if you say, oh, the budget is too tight, I really need more money because the sun and the rain and the paddles doesn't really work well. I want to buy a bucket that actually has a lid, whatever it might be, right? You know which circle you go to ask for those things. Okay. What if person A really wants to be the ping pong queen, but they aren't selected? Yeah. Well, we would probably hear some input, but we wouldn't just go with the person that raises their hand the fastest, or who doesn't say no the fastest, which is also sometimes how volunteering works, right? If that person has a lot of energy around it, chances are we would hear it, or we would ask who's in general interested and make a short list and then select among those. Or we would select somebody for a year and then see who's next. I'm looking at the question in the chat, and I did see the earlier ones, but those are very on topic right now here. Who is the we that's picking the ping pong czar? Okay. So we talked earlier about the ping pong example, which is actually coming in handy now. So let's say we are now deciding that, what did we decide? Hold on. I'm afraid we decided that community life would be in charge of the ping pong table and the COVID policies around the ping pong table. I think that's how it went. So then community life actually created 2 roles that had to do with cleaning of the ping pong table. And there was another thing, outdoor furniture. Again, that was back then when we thought that was a bigger problem than it now turns out to be. So we had roles created for those 2 purposes. Since we had decided that those policies live in community life, it's on community life to create those roles. So it's like a subset kind of relationship. So that is the we. And if then, Maggie, if somebody is dissatisfied with the work individuals do, if you don't like how the windows are not clean in the common house, which is my job, by the way, then you go to common house circle, and then they might talk to me and say, that doesn't seem to be good enough. So you know who's holding them. Who picks the person also? That circle that creates the role also fills the role with the person. Okay. Let me do some examples here. And then my plan was to have you in small groups try out to write one of those groups. So again, recap. Why do I say this is a good idea to embrace the roles a little bit more wholeheartedly, I guess, is because we're proactive in spreading the work. It's transparent, it's clear, it's empowering. And we can focus more on what's actually important, on the tricky things, on the connecting things, if we don't have to go over task management so often. Sometimes people worry that here the bad, like the devil side here. Do we trust that person? You need to be willing to give away some power. If you empower somebody to take care of everything ping pong, then you might not have a final say on what ping pong paddle is being bought or not. Then you would just have to let that go. So you can give feedback, but that person is it for the period of time that you set them. So this is a little image here for the decentralization of circle, of how we're trying not to hold on power, but actually put those in. I forgot that I made these slides. That would have been helpful to show how the roles are part of circles, right? So they're all different things. On that, by the way, the idea is that you don't wear only one hat, but the way roles work is you can wear several hats. So I stack them on top of each other. Looks kind of cool. So for example, in my case, I do governance things in my community. I also clean the window, like the glass parts of the doors in the common house, not right now though. And what's another thing that I do? Oh, I'm part of the scheduling team for one particular aspect of things. Is there anything else? Oh yeah, they have one other role actually connected to our general circle, but that's, yeah, so I'm holding 4 roles that are very clear to me, so that makes it easy to carry them out. So here's my little template that I brought for our exercise. For example, we have a fridge czar. Funny that some of you also use the word czar there in the example. So we have a person who's empowered to discard food, label food, cleaning the fridge, reinforcing the sectioning. Like they actually came up with a system of how a fridge in the common house is separated out, checks the fridge and so on. So those would be activities. The why of that is pretty easy, I assume so. And then the domain. So what is the context? What context is the role holder guided by, and what can the role holder decide alone? It's good to decide, to be clear about that. So here I wrote, decides what food can be discarded and communicates with cooks and cook teams around leftovers. And special skills, none. Basic cleaning skills, organizational skills. So that's all I want in terms of clarity. But again, this is different from walking up to somebody and saying, hey, could you clean the fridge from time to time, right? This is just a whole level of clarity and empowerment also, because if you only tell that person to go do the fridge, clean the fridge, they might then be wondering, well, but do I throw this out now? Who would I talk to? What I do with the leftovers, right? And that way it's really defined. Now they know. And that is a service to the person who's doing that role. Here's another example, also actually a real example from my community. Pet officer. We have a bunch of policies around pets. And I could have written, actually, should have written that here, pet policy. But what this person does is welcoming new cats and dogs, making sure owners know and remember the policies, informing the community, dealing with complaints. So if there's a complaint about a dog, it doesn't come to the circle, it comes to the role first, the holder of the role. And that person shields the circle from having to deal with each and every complaint about yet another dog incident, of which we had our share ourselves. Yet, for example, this is one example, actually, this is something I made up, is that the person is not allowed to expel a pet without the circle. So the example that I would like to play with for maybe 12-ish minutes and breakouts is have you in small groups think about if you had to make up a role. And I know this is easy, and it's not so easy because all your circumstances are so different. But all I want to do is just give you a taste of, yay, you can actually write a role description. It's not all that hard. It's really not hard at all. Just make it up. So if you, for example, as a community have a contact form, right, on your website, like, hey, I'm interested in hearing more about your community, those emails go somewhere, define the role of the person that is getting that email. What, like, and I called it contact form manager. You can call it whatever you want to. You probably have that role. Do you have it written down? Somebody is doing it, right? What are they empowered to do? What are they not empowered to do? When would we like to hear? And so on. So I'm asking you to figure that out. How often does the role change? So there's two layers here. One is, I'm going to answer that one question before I send you. There's the role. The role might change, as in the description of the role, like the container. So you can review that as you need it. But then how often a different person gets plugged into that container, you also define, but those are really two different questions. And you just define that. It can be a year, can be 2 years, can be 3 months, or whatever it takes. So you will find yourself in a small breakout and you'll just wing it somehow. Don't overthink it, just try it out. It just makes it a little bit more likely that you feel like you know how to do it if you want to do it in real life. Plus you get to meet other people. Welcome back, everybody.
Great exercise.
Yeah, did you enjoy it? I want to look at one of them here. Hold on. This one I want to look at. Somebody's still, isn't it so funny that once you do that, people start taking so much ownership that they even finish, although it's just an exercise and the exercise is even over and people are still working on it here. Anyway, that's just funny to me. You know, funny in the best way. It's just funny how humans are, that you want to like complete something. That's exactly on point, actually, right? That's exactly what it is. So here we have one of the examples. So activities would be responding promptly. Look at that. There's even a time frame. Triage to appropriate group and distribute info. So they pass things on. And what do we have here? Main editing community info for public consumption. Update. Ooh, you've made the role even bigger. Now that person is also in charge of FAQs on the website and so on. So you can see that now if you chunk it, that's actually quite common, that people then go like, oh, you know, while they're at it, they might also be like, you know, doing this and be doing that. Like you add things that make sense because, for example, great example here. If you have somebody who reads all those emails and you empower them to make the FAQs on the website, you can be pretty sure that the FAQs are going to improve because they are the people who know what's being asked all the time. So that's one of the cases where putting operations like carrying out tasks and responsibility and empowerment together is a really smart move, because now you have the direct feedback loop from outsiders ask questions to person who changes information on website to make the fit better. So great example. Just wanted to show that real quick. I realize I owe you still a few questions or a few answers, I mean, from questions from earlier. Actually, one of them I'm not going to talk about, and that is how new residents are being taught sociocracy in my community, because to be honest, and I say that as governance circle, we suck at that. We're not doing a good job. Mostly because we don't have all that much turnover, and I do this for work all the time. So anyway, do people in your community find that they bring some of the principles of DG into their workplace and have more satisfying jobs? I know there is some spilling into other domains. I do know that. Not as much as one would think, I think, because it's not so easy to be the person who's implementing somewhere, actually. But I see that especially like in volunteer groups, so not so much at work, but more in volunteer groups that they bring those things. That I see a lot. Is there an overall list of all the roles? In our Google Drive, yes. Well, not all the roles, actually. We have some of the roles, and then each circle should know what roles they have and what their terms are and so on. So that's also distributed that information. So those are the little add-ons. We are at time.
Thanks so much for this presentation. This was wonderful.
I would like to ask a question. So Ted, I first of all, thank you very much for your great presentation. I'm wondering, at the very inception of a group, even like when you're just with 2 or 3 people, do you decide then on your governance and decision-making system and move forward from that, or do you hold off until you have more people so that it's more, so even that decision is more democratic?
It's funny you would ask that, actually. This is such a big problem that I did a webinar on that very question recently, and I'm actually literally writing a book about that right now. It's actually done. Because this is completely my perspective, just, you know, I mean, you asked, I'm answering, you do with it whatever you want to do. In my experience, there's just way too many groups who put off that decision. Then it gets contentious over time, right? Then you have, let's say, 20 people arguing about what the governance system should be without having a governance system in place to decide what governance system they have. And I've seen groups reach out to me saying, literally saying, we want to invite you in to help us with our governance. We all want it, but somehow we don't know who makes the decision to do that. That particular group I never heard from today. I assume they simply fell apart over that problem. So to me, this is really a key problem. And it's as foundational as what language do we speak in? Because if you don't know what the decision-making method is, by what decision-making method are you going to decide what your decision-making method is? It's like, in what language are we talking about? What language we're speaking? It's that fundamental. Yes. And I've seen so many groups suffer over it. I'm really tired of it because it seems to be like a trap that snaps shut. You know, you walk and you go like, oh, no problem. We just put that off. We just put that off. And then boom, you're basically in this no-win situation. So long story short, I would figure it out as early as possible and make it part of the invitation. You're saying we're building cohousing, we're building it here, we're building it this way. Join or don't join. Those are the choices. Otherwise, you're going insane.
And put it in writing, because we're at that same stage. We have like 15 people and one person doesn't like sociocracy.
Good luck. And Marcia.
Yeah, so thank you very much. This was a most helpful seminar. And I learned a great deal of things that I hadn't known about sociocracy. The whole dynamic governance, the idea that reevaluation is built in is something I'm part of Bay State Commons co-housing. We're in the Boston area and we're working with Karen Gimnig. We have Valerie, who's on screen also. She and I are part of the team that's looking to change our governance. We use a quote unquote consensus model. We were originally trained by Laird Schaub in consensus, and now we're looking at whether we want to incorporate some principles of quote unquote sociocracy. And so I'm curious about a lot of things. First of all, there are some things that you highlighted that weren't part, and I think I went to one presentation on sociocracy by the guy in your community. And so I was aware of the linking circles, and there's a leader and a sub-leader that's part of the circle, and it all seemed a little overkill. And Karen explained that that partly came from kind of the business world. But what I didn't get as clearly is the idea of individuals and their roles. And so I thought that was just terrific. And we also have people who are just allergic to the term sociocracy. So what I don't understand is, why did it get such a controversial reputation? Why is it put in opposition to consensus when in fact within a sociocratic structure, I think that the circles are making their decisions primarily by consensus? Where is this, either or coming from?
That's a really interesting question. I think here's one thing, and that is that traditionally people in cohousing tend to be very suspicious around power, right? And the whole concept that somebody might decide about something and you don't have decision-making power on that freaks them out. To me, and there's a little bit, I'm sorry to say, there's a slight generational thing in it, because I notice that the younger people are, the less they freak out about that, because they're like, yeah, duh, therefore I don't have to decide everything. Yay, great. You know, like they have total different logic on it. And I'm also in that camp of like, you mean there's somebody who's willing to take care of something even without asking me? Yes, go for it, you know, because I don't want to decide everything. I don't even want to have an opinion on everything. But that's, I think that's some of the reaction of like, wait, somebody might decide something and I might not be able to shoot it down. That's not okay.
And of course, the art is what things bring everyone into, because people are going to have strong feelings that need to be heard. And
Yeah.
I'm sure in a sociocratic framework, although you haven't talked that much about it, things get escalated to plenary, and then you use consensus strategies and other, you know, discussion strategies to come up with a good answer at a plenary. Sometimes I assume the plenary has to be involved.
Yeah, as feedback givers, a lot. Yes.
So Ted, I did have a question. I didn't know if you answered it or not. Do you have like a manual for your community where you have all the circles and their aims and the goals and the roles, and then like as a living document that changes?
Oh, there you go. We have a governance agreement. We have a policy manual. So some of those things stay a little bit more static. Aims and domains table we have.
Thank you so much. This was great. It was wonderful to meet you.